The courtroom camera captured something that would become the most shared Judge Judy clip in television history. A woman sat in the plaintiff's chair, speaking in what she clearly believed was a flawless British accent, describing her case with the kind of affected sophistication that would make actual British people cringe with embarrassment. Victoria Ashford Williams, as she called herself, had no idea that in exactly 8 minutes, Judge Judy would expose her as the most fraudulent, pathetic con artist ever caught on national television. What started as an elaborate performance of fake refinement would end with her sobbing uncontrollably in her real voice, a harsh Midwestern American accent that shattered the illusion she'd spent months carefully constructing. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. Victoria didn't just lose her case. She didn't just get embarrassed about her terrible fake accent. What Judge Judy did to her in those 8 minutes was so devastatingly thorough, so brutally precise, that it exposed a pattern of fraud spanning 15 years and 8 different states. We're talking about a woman who walked into that courtroom thinking her British persona would intimidate a working-class defendant and impress America's toughest judge, only to discover that Judge Judy had spent the previous night tracking down her real identity, her criminal history, and every single lie she'd ever told. Picture this. A woman who calls herself Victoria Ashford Williams, strutting into Judge Judy's courtroom like she's attending a garden party at Buckingham Palace. Her blonde hair was styled in an elaborate updo that screamed trying too hard. Her outfit was carefully chosen to project old money sophistication, a tweed blazer with elbow patches, a silk scarf tied just so, and pearl earrings that were actually cheap costume jewelry trying desperately to pass as the real thing. She carried a leather portfolio embossed with what appeared to be a family crest, something she'd probably ordered online for $30. Her confidence was absolutely off the charts. She'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, practicing her fake British accent in front of mirrors, rehearsing her testimony with all the dramatic flair of a community theater actress auditioning for a period drama. She looked at her opponent, a middle-class working mother, with the kind of dismissive contempt that only comes from someone who genuinely believes they're better than everyone else in the room. Victoria was suing her neighbor, Jennifer Lawrence, for $3,500, claiming that Jennifer's children had run through her home with muddy shoes and destroyed what she described as a priceless Persian rug from her family's estate in the Cotswolds. She had paperwork, photographs, and what she claimed were authentication certificates proving the rug's value and provenance. She'd been planning this lawsuit for months, ever since Jennifer had made the mistake of questioning Victoria's background at a neighborhood association meeting. That single question, asking where exactly in England Victoria was from and why her accent seemed to change depending on who she was talking to, had marked Jennifer for destruction. Victoria had decided to teach this common American woman a lesson about respecting her superiors, and she'd manufactured an entire legal case to do it. What the audience didn't know, what Victoria herself couldn't possibly imagine, was that Judge Judy had spotted the fraud within the first 30 seconds of reading the case file. The overly elaborate British name, the too perfect victim story, the convenient family heirloom, the theatrical documentation. Judge Judy had seen every type of scammer, every variety of liar, and every breed of con artist who thought they could manipulate her courtroom. But Victoria was special. She was about to become the poster child for what happens when elaborate fraud meets a judge who had access to background investigation resources and absolutely zero tolerance for people who waste her time with fake accents and fabricated identities. The case seemed straightforward on the surface, just a dispute over a damaged rug between neighbors. But Judge Judy's experienced eye had caught multiple red flags in Victoria's initial paperwork. The British spellings were inconsistent, sometimes using honor and color, other times slipping into American spelling. The supposed family estate in the Cotswolds was never specifically named, just vaguely referenced. The authentication certificate for the Persian rug had been created on a home computer with clip art borders. Most damning of all, a quick background check had revealed that Victoria Ashford Williams didn't exist in any British records, immigration databases, or property registries. But someone named Vicky Williams from Toledo, Ohio, with a history of small-time fraud and multiple aliases, matched her exact description. Judge Judy had made some calls. She'd contacted British immigration authorities, antique authentication experts, and law enforcement agencies in 4 different states. By the time Victoria walked through those courtroom doors practicing her fake accent and adjusting her costume jewelry pearls, Judge Judy had assembled a complete dossier on who this woman really was, what she'd really done, and exactly how she was about to destroy her on national television. Victoria thought her British accent would give her credibility, sophistication, and an advantage over her common American neighbor. Instead, it was about to become the most embarrassing exposure of fraud in courtroom television history. The woman who thought she sounded like British royalty was about to be revealed as nothing more than a small-time con artist from Ohio who'd watched too many Downton Abbey episodes and actually believed she could fool a judge who'd been demolishing fraud since before Victoria was born. Jennifer Lawrence sat trembling in the defendant's chair, clutching a folder filled with receipts, photographs, and documentation that proved her children had never even entered Victoria's home on the date in question. For 6 months, she'd lived in absolute terror of this woman who had inserted herself into their quiet suburban neighborhood like a virus, spreading her fake British persona and using it as a weapon against anyone who dared question her authority. Jennifer had spent $2,000 on lawyer consultations, money her family desperately needed for other things, trying to prepare a defense against what she knew was a completely fabricated lawsuit. She'd lost sleep, developed anxiety attacks, and watched helplessly as her children asked why the mean lady with the funny voice kept sending scary letters to their house. The worst part was that most of their neighbors had sided with Victoria, believing that someone with such a refined British accent and sophisticated manner must be telling the truth. After all, why would someone of such obvious breeding and class lie about something so petty? What Jennifer didn't know was that she was about to be vindicated in the most spectacular way possible. Victoria had chosen the wrong neighbor to target and the absolutely wrong courtroom to stage her performance. Judge Judy had spent 25 years as a family court judge in New York before her television career, handling thousands of cases involving fraud, manipulation, and people who thought accents and appearances could substitute for facts and evidence. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect liars within seconds of meeting them, and Victoria Ashford Williams had triggered every single alarm bell in Judge Judy's extensive arsenal of fraud detection instincts. The entitled posture, the theatrical manner of speaking, the way she looked at Jennifer with barely concealed contempt, the overly elaborate backstory that couldn't be verified. It all pointed to someone with a much darker history than she was presenting to the cameras. Victoria's real name was Vicki Williams, and she was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio, never leaving the United States except for one cruise to Mexico when she was 19. She'd dropped out of high school at 16, bounced between minimum wage jobs for years, and eventually discovered that creating fake personas was far more profitable than honest work. Her British accent fraud was actually her fourth major con. In Arizona 3 years ago, she'd affected a French accent and claimed to be a descendant of minor European nobility, scamming elderly residents out of thousands of dollars with fake investment opportunities. In Florida, she'd used an exaggerated Southern belle persona, complete with claims of old plantation family heritage, to run a charity scam that targeted church congregations. In Nevada, she'd posed as a Hollywood talent scout, using a California Valley girl accent to convince aspiring actors to pay for headshots and portfolio services that never materialized. Each time, she'd moved before authorities could build a case against her, leaving behind angry victims and outstanding warrants that she assumed would never catch up to her. Her current British aristocrat persona had been her most successful yet. She'd moved to this upscale suburban neighborhood 6 months ago, immediately adopting the Ashford Williams name and the accent she'd carefully constructed by binge-watching British period dramas and YouTube videos of royal family members. She'd name-dropped Oxford University, summers in the countryside, family estates, and aristocratic connections with such confidence that her neighbors had simply accepted her claims as fact. After all, who would go to such elaborate lengths to fake an entire identity? Within weeks, she'd positioned herself as the neighborhood's unofficial social arbiter, hosting tea parties where she critiqued her neighbors' manners and education, offering unsolicited advice on proper etiquette, and gradually building a reputation as someone refined and cultured. She'd successfully scammed 2 neighbors with fake investment opportunities in British real estate, convinced another to pay her $5,000 for introduction to her supposed connections in London's art world, and was working on several other long-term cons when Jennifer Lawrence made her fatal mistake. At a neighborhood association meeting, Jennifer had politely asked Victoria where exactly in England she was from, noting that her accent seemed to shift between different regional dialects depending on the conversation. It was an innocent question from someone who had actually spent time in England and recognized that Victoria's accent was a bizarre mashup of different British regions, mixing posh London pronunciations with Northern England vowels and throwing in random Cockney rhyming slang at inappropriate moments. The question had hung in the air like a grenade, and Victoria's face had flushed with anger before she recovered with a laugh and some vague answer about moving around frequently as a child. But the damage was done. Someone had questioned her authenticity, and Victoria had learned long ago that the best defense against exposure was aggressive offense. She'd decided to destroy Jennifer's credibility by manufacturing a lawsuit so convincing, so well documented with her fake certificates and theatrical testimony, that the entire neighborhood would side with her and Jennifer would be marked as a troublemaker who attacked refined people out of jealousy. Victoria had spent 3 months preparing her case. She'd purchased a cheap Persian-style rug from HomeGoods for $200, then created an elaborate fake history for it, complete with forged authentication certificates she'd designed on her home computer using clip art and fancy fonts. She'd taken the rug to a friend who worked at a print shop and had professional-looking documents created that claimed the rug was a 16th-century family heirloom valued at $15,000. She'd staged photographs showing the rug with supposed mud stains, though any expert would immediately recognize that the stains were created with craft store fabric paint rather than actual mud. She'd rehearsed her testimony for hours, perfecting her British accent's indignant tone, practicing her aristocratic mannerisms, and crafting a narrative that painted Jennifer's children as destructive little monsters and herself as the cultured victim of American barbarism. She'd even created a fake email trail showing that she'd repeatedly asked Jennifer to control her children, though the emails had all been sent from accounts she'd created herself. Judge Judy had seen all of this preparation in Victoria's paperwork, and she'd recognized it immediately for what it was. The documentation was too perfect, too theatrical, too obviously created by someone who thought volume and presentation could substitute for authenticity. But what sealed Victoria's fate was Judge Judy's decision to actually verify the claims rather than just accept them at face value. One phone call to British immigration authorities confirmed that no Victoria Ashford Williams had ever entered or left the United Kingdom. Another call to Oxford University confirmed that no one by that name had ever attended or been affiliated with the institution. A third call to rug authentication experts revealed that the certificates were obvious fakes using incorrect terminology and formatting that no legitimate appraiser would ever use. And a final call to law enforcement databases revealed that Vicki Williams from Toledo, Ohio, had outstanding warrants in 2 states and a pattern of identity fraud stretching back 15 years. The courtroom doors opened and Victoria Ashford Williams made her entrance like she was arriving at a royal wedding. She swept in with her leather portfolio clutched against her chest, her posture impossibly straight, her chin elevated at an angle that suggested she was perpetually looking down on everyone around her. The cameras captured every detail of her performance as she took her place at the plaintiff's table, smoothing her tweed blazer and adjusting her silk scarf with the kind of precise, delicate movements she'd clearly practiced to convey refined breeding. Judge Judy watched this theatrical entrance with the calm, patient expression of a predator that had already calculated exactly how the hunt would end. She'd seen thousands of performers walk through her courtroom doors over the decades, people who thought costumes and accents could create credibility, but Victoria was operating on a level of delusion that was almost impressive in its completeness. Judge Judy opened the case with her signature no-nonsense approach, her voice cutting through the courtroom with surgical precision. Miss Ashford Williams, you're suing Miss Lawrence for $3,500, claiming her children damaged your Persian rug. Tell me what happened. It was a simple question, the kind Judge Judy asked dozens of times every day, but Victoria's response immediately signaled that this case was going to be extraordinary. Victoria didn't just answer the question. She launched into a performance that would have made Broadway casting directors cringe with second-hand embarrassment. Your Honor, this situation is quite simply appalling and represents everything wrong with how children are raised in modern America. The accent was thick, every word carefully enunciated with the kind of exaggerated British pronunciation that immediately sounded fake to anyone who'd actually spent time around British people. On the 23rd of March, I had invited several neighbors for afternoon tea, as one does, when Miss Lawrence's children came barreling through my home with absolutely no regard for proper decorum or respect for other people's property. Judge Judy's eyebrows raised slightly, the first microscopic warning sign that experienced viewers recognized as the moment before everything went wrong for whoever was testifying. The audience shifted in their seats, some leaning forward with interest, others exchanging skeptical glances at the over-the-top accent. Victoria continued, completely oblivious to the danger she was walking into, her confidence growing with every word. These children, Your Honor, had been playing in the garden, and rather than removing their muddy Wellington boots as any properly raised child would know to do, they tracked enormous amounts of mud directly onto my 16th-century Persian silk rug that has been in my family since our estate in the Cotswolds was first established. She paused for dramatic effect, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief as if overcome with emotion. This rug has survived wars, it has survived generations, and it was destroyed in mere moments by the negligence of a mother who simply refuses to teach her children basic civilized behavior. Judge Judy let her continue, asking no follow-up questions yet, simply watching as Victoria dug herself deeper with every theatrical gesture and affected pronunciation. Victoria pulled documents from her leather portfolio with a flourish, presenting them to the bailiff like she was handing over crown jewels. I have here the authentication certificates proving the rug's provenance and value, documentation of the damage, and correspondence showing my repeated attempts to address this matter with Miss Lawrence before being forced to take legal action. Her accent was becoming even more exaggerated as she warmed to her performance, throwing in British phrases that no actual British person would use in casual conversation. Quite frankly, Your Honor, I find it rather distressing that one must resort to litigation simply to receive basic respect and accountability from one's neighbors. In England, such matters would be handled with far more grace and consideration. The moment those words left her mouth, Judge Judy's expression shifted from patient observation to active interest. So you're from England originally, Miss Ashford-Williams? The question was asked casually, almost as an afterthought, but there was an edge to it that Victoria completely missed. Oh yes, Your Honor, born and bred, as they say. I spent my formative years in the Cotswolds before attending Oxford, and I've maintained strong connections to my homeland despite relocating to America several years ago. Judge Judy nodded slowly, making a note on the papers in front of her. And what part of the Cotswolds specifically? Victoria hesitated for just a fraction of a second, a microscopic pause that Judge Judy caught immediately. The Western region, Your Honor, near Cheltenham. Lovely countryside, absolutely breathtaking. My family's estate has been there for centuries. Judge Judy made another note, her pen moving deliberately across the page. And you attended Oxford University? What did you study? Victoria's confidence was still intact, but there was the slightest tension in her shoulders now, a tiny physical tell that suggested she was starting to realize these weren't just casual conversation questions. I read English literature, Your Honor, with a focus on Victorian-era novels and poetry. It was a transformative experience, truly, being surrounded by such history and academic excellence. Judge Judy looked up from her notes, her eyes locking onto Victoria's with an intensity that made several audience members audibly inhale. That's fascinating. And how long have you been in the United States? Victoria shifted her weight almost imperceptibly, another micro-expression that Judge Judy catalogued mentally. Approximately 5 years, Your Honor, though I return to England frequently to visit family and maintain my properties. Judge Judy nodded again, that same slow, deliberate nod that regular viewers knew meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Before we continue with your testimony about the rug, Miss Ashford-Williams, I'd like to hear from Miss Lawrence. Judge Judy's attention turned to Jennifer, who was sitting rigid in her chair, fighting back tears of frustration and anxiety. Miss Lawrence, tell me your version of what happened on March 23rd. Jennifer's voice was shaky but clear, her Midwestern American accent in stark contrast to Victoria's theatrical British pronunciation. Your Honor, my children were never in her house on that date or any other date. We've lived next door to her for 6 months, and she's never invited us over, never spoken to us except to complain about various things. On March 23rd, my kids were at school until 3 o'clock, then they were at soccer practice until 6, and then they were home with me the rest of the evening. I have time-stamped photos, sign-in sheets from the soccer practice, and security camera footage from our home showing they never left our property after we got home. Judge Judy examined the documentation Jennifer had brought, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp and calculating. These are very detailed records, Miss Lawrence. Why do you think Miss Ashford Williams would claim your children damaged her rug if they were never in her home? Jennifer took a deep breath, glancing nervously at Victoria, who was staring at her with unconcealed contempt. Your Honor, I think this is retaliation because I asked her some questions at a neighborhood meeting about her background. She claimed to be from England, but her accent changes depending on who she's talking to, and some of her stories don't add up. After I asked those questions, she started targeting my family with complaints and now this lawsuit. Victoria let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind reserved for dealing with people she considered beneath her station. Your Honor, if I may address these absurd accusations. This is precisely the sort of defensive behavior one expects from someone caught in negligence. Rather than accept responsibility, Miss Lawrence has concocted this elaborate conspiracy theory suggesting I've fabricated an entire lawsuit out of petty revenge. It's simply preposterous. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, that slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth again, the expression that meant she was about to detonate a bomb that would level everything the plaintiff had built. Miss Ashford Williams, I have to say, your accent is quite remarkable. Very distinctive. Victoria preened slightly at what she mistook for a compliment. Thank you, Your Honor. I've worked quite hard to maintain my proper diction despite being surrounded by American English for several years. Judge Judy's smile widened just a fraction. I'm sure you have. In fact, I'd say you've worked very, very hard on that accent. Wouldn't you agree? There was something in Judge Judy's tone that finally penetrated Victoria's wall of arrogance, a subtle shift that made her realize this wasn't actually a compliment. I'm not certain I understand your meaning, Your Honor. Judge Judy opened a thick folder on her desk, the movement deliberate and theatrical. Oh, I think you understand perfectly. But let's continue with your testimony for now. Tell me more about this Persian rug in your family estate in the Cotswolds. Victoria's confidence was beginning to show hairline fractures, tiny cracks in the facade that she was desperately trying to plaster over with even more elaborate British affectations. She launched back into her testimony, describing the rug with the kind of passionate detail that she clearly believed would overwhelm any skepticism with sheer volume of information. Your Honor, this particular rug is a 16th-century Persian silk masterpiece, hand-woven by artisans in what is now modern-day Iran. It features intricate floral patterns and was acquired by my great-great-grandfather during his diplomatic service in the region. The piece has been authenticated by multiple experts over the years and represents not just monetary value but irreplaceable family heritage. She gestured to her authentication documents with a flourish that was becoming increasingly desperate rather than authoritative. The current market value, as you can see from the certificates, is estimated at $15,000, though truly such a piece is priceless when one considers the sentimental and historical significance. Judge Judy examined the documents with the kind of careful attention that made Victoria visibly nervous. These certificates look very official, Miss Ashford Williams. Tell me, which authentication service provided these evaluations? Victoria hesitated, just for a moment, before responding with practiced smoothness. The London Antiquities Appraisal Society, Your Honor. They're quite respected in England for evaluating pieces of historical significance. Judge Judy nodded slowly, setting the documents down and fixing Victoria with a stare that could have frozen boiling water. The London Antiquities Appraisal Society. That's interesting because I had my researchers contact them yesterday, and do you know what they told me? The color was draining from Victoria's face like someone had opened a valve, but she tried to maintain her composure, her accent becoming even more exaggerated as she overcompensated for her growing panic. I'm certain there must be some confusion, Your Honor. Perhaps they have multiple offices or my paperwork references a different organization with a similar name. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees. "There's no confusion, Miss Ashford Williams. The London Antiquities Appraisal Society doesn't exist. It never existed. The certificates you've presented were created on a home computer using clip art and fonts available in Microsoft Word." The audience gasped collectively, the sound rippling through the courtroom like a wave. Victoria's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, her carefully constructed accent slipping for just a moment as pure Midwestern American vowels leaked through. "That's simply not accurate, Your Honor. Perhaps your researchers made an error in their investigation." Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice taking on the razor-sharp edge that had made her a legend in courtroom television. "My researchers don't make errors, Miss Ashford Williams. Or should I say, Miss Williams? Vicki Williams from Toledo, Ohio." The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Every person in that courtroom, from the audience members to the camera operators to Jennifer Lawrence sitting with her mouth hanging open in shock, understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Victoria's face went through a rapid series of transformations, from confident to confused to panicked to desperately calculating. Her accent wavered dangerously as she tried to formulate a response, mixing British and American pronunciations in the same sentence. "I don't know what you're referring to, Your Honor. My name is Victoria Ashford Williams, and I can provide documentation of my identity and background if there's been some sort of administrative confusion with your research team." Judge Judy opened her thick folder wider, pulling out page after page of documentation. "Oh, there's no confusion at all. In fact, let me share what my very thorough research team discovered about you." Judge Judy's voice took on the tone of someone reading a particularly damning criminal indictment. "Vicki Lynn Williams, born in Toledo, Ohio, on June 15, 1983. High school dropout. No college education whatsoever, certainly no attendance at Oxford University. Never entered the United Kingdom according to British immigration authorities. No property ownership in the Cotswolds or anywhere else in England. No family estate, no diplomatic ancestors, no aristocratic heritage of any kind." Victoria's accent was disintegrating in real time, her careful British pronunciation collapsing under the weight of Judge Judy's systematic demolition. "That's private information, and I don't see how it's relevant to the case at hand regarding the damaged rug." The words came out in a bizarre hybrid accent, some words still clinging to British affectation while others slipped into pure Ohio vowels. Judge Judy wasn't finished. "Oh, it's extremely relevant because it establishes a pattern of behavior. Let's continue, shall we? In 2019, you were in Phoenix, Arizona, using the name Vivian Beaumont and affecting a French accent while scamming elderly residents with fake investment opportunities in European real estate. You left Arizona with outstanding warrants for fraud." The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs as Judge Judy continued her devastating recitation. In 2020, you were in Fort Myers, Florida, calling yourself Virginia Bell Ashworth and using an exaggerated Southern accent to run a fake charity scam targeting church congregations. You collected over $30,000 claiming it would help hurricane victims, and not a single penny went to any charitable cause. Victoria was openly trembling now, her hands gripping the edge of the table as her carefully constructed world collapsed around her. In 2021, you were in Las Vegas using the name Veronica West and posing as a Hollywood talent scout, convincing aspiring actors to pay thousands of dollars for services you never provided. You have outstanding warrants in Nevada as well. The accent was completely gone now, replaced by Victoria's real voice, a higher-pitched, nasal Midwestern American accent that sounded nothing like the sophisticated British pronunciation she'd been performing. "Your Honor, I can explain all of this. Those were misunderstandings, and I've changed my life since then. I'm not that person anymore." Judge Judy's laugh was short and utterly devoid of humor. "You're not that person anymore. You're sitting in my courtroom right now, using a fake British accent, a fake aristocratic identity, fake authentication documents, and a completely fabricated lawsuit to harass an innocent woman because she dared to question your lies. You're exactly that person, Miss Williams. You've just changed the accent and the costume. Victoria made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her performance. The accent is real, Your Honor. I've lived in England, I just don't have documentation of all my travel because some of it was private family visits on tourist visas. And the rug is real, it was damaged, and Miss Lawrence's children were responsible regardless of what her fabricated evidence suggests. Judge Judy fixed her with a stare that could have melted steel. Stop. Just stop the performance. I've contacted the store where you purchased that rug 3 months ago. Home Goods on Riverside Drive. You paid $187.99 for it. I have the receipt, the security camera footage of your purchase, and a statement from the store manager. Victoria's final defense crumbled completely as Judge Judy produced actual photographic evidence of her buying the cheap reproduction rug, pushing a shopping cart through a discount home goods store, her face clearly visible on the security footage. The accent died its final death as Victoria slumped in her chair, no longer able to maintain even a pretense of her British persona. Okay. I bought the rug there. But that doesn't mean it's not valuable, and it doesn't mean Jennifer's kids didn't damage it. The words came out in pure Midwestern American, the accent she'd been hiding completely exposed. Judge Judy's response was immediate and brutal. Your children were never in her house, Miss Williams. They were at school and soccer practice. You know this because you've been watching their schedule, planning this entire fraudulent lawsuit as revenge for being questioned about your fake identity. You created fake mud stains on a cheap rug using craft store fabric paint, fabricated authentication documents, manufactured a completely false timeline of events, and dragged an innocent family through months of legal harassment because your ego couldn't handle someone asking where you were really from. Victoria burst into tears, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face as the full weight of her exposure crushed what remained of her composure. Please, Judge, I'll drop the case. I'll leave them alone. Just please don't report me to the police. I have nowhere else to go. I need help. I made mistakes but I'm trying to start over. Judge Judy's expression remained unmoved, carved from granite and absolute conviction. You're not trying to start over. You're trying to run the same con you've been running for 15 years. The only difference is that this time, you chose the wrong victim and the wrong courtroom. Your case is dismissed with prejudice. You will pay Miss Lawrence $5,000 to cover her legal fees and compensation for the emotional distress you've caused her family. Furthermore, I'm forwarding all of this evidence to the district attorney's office, and I'm personally recommending that they contact authorities in Arizona, Florida, and Nevada regarding your outstanding warrants. Victoria Williams sat completely broken in her chair, no longer the sophisticated British aristocrat she pretended to be, but a sobbing woman from Toledo whose entire elaborate con had been dismantled piece by piece on national television. Her designer knockoff blazer looked ridiculous now, a costume from a performance that had ended in spectacular failure. The silk scarf that had seemed so elegant when she'd entered the courtroom now looked like a cheap prop from a theater company's clearance sale. Her tears had destroyed her carefully applied makeup, leaving mascara trails that made her look like a melting wax figure of her former arrogant self. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as she tried one final desperate plea, her real voice cracking with emotion and desperation. Judge, please, I have nowhere to go. If you report me, I'll be arrested. I'll lose everything. Can't you just let me drop the case and leave? I promise I'll disappear and never bother anyone again. I just need one more chance to get my life together without going to prison. Judge Judy's response was colder than a February morning in Montana, each word landing with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. You've had chances, Miss Williams. You've had multiple chances across multiple states over multiple years. Every time you left before facing consequences, you just moved somewhere else and started the exact same pattern with a different accent and a different fake name. You're not asking for a chance to get your life together. You're asking for permission to keep running so you can find your next victim in your next city with your next fictional identity. The answer is no. Jennifer Lawrence deserves justice. Your previous victims deserve justice. And quite frankly, your future potential victims deserve to be protected from you. The bailiff was already moving closer to Victoria's table, understanding that the ruling was final and that this woman might need to be escorted from the courtroom if her emotional breakdown intensified further. Judge Judy turned her attention to Jennifer Lawrence, who was sitting in her chair with tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of relief rather than distress. "Miss Lawrence, I want to apologize on behalf of the judicial system that you had to endure 6 months of harassment before getting justice. You did nothing wrong. You asked a reasonable question about a neighbor's background, and instead of honest answers, you were targeted with a fraudulent lawsuit designed to punish you for seeing through her lies. The $5,000 I'm awarding you should cover your legal consultation fees and provide some compensation for the sleepless nights and anxiety this con artist put you and your family through." Jennifer managed to whisper a tearful thank you, her voice barely audible but filled with genuine gratitude. Judge Judy's expression softened slightly, the only moment of warmth she'd shown during the entire proceedings. "You protected your children, you documented everything carefully, and you had the courage to fight back against someone who was using a fake persona to intimidate you. That takes real strength." The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the silent courtroom. Case dismissed. Miss Williams, you are ordered to pay Miss Lawrence $5,000 immediately. You are banned from filing any further claims in this jurisdiction. And as I stated, all evidence will be forwarded to appropriate law enforcement authorities. Next case. Victoria was escorted out of the courtroom, her sobs echoing through the hallway as she shuffled away in complete disgrace. The woman who had entered with such confidence and theatrical sophistication was leaving as nothing more than an exposed fraud whose 15 minutes of fame would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. The audience, which had been sitting in stunned silence throughout Judge Judy's systematic destruction of Victoria's lies, erupted in spontaneous applause for Jennifer Lawrence. Court staff members who had witnessed thousands of cases over the years would later say they'd never seen such a complete and total exposure of a con artist, and they'd certainly never seen someone's fake accent disintegrate so spectacularly on live television. Within 2 hours of the episode airing, the clip had been uploaded to YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and every other social media platform imaginable. By the end of the first day, it had accumulated over 5 million views. By the end of the first week, over 40 million people had watched Victoria Williams's accent and identity collapse in real time. The hashtag fake accent trended worldwide for 3 consecutive days as viewers shared their reactions, created memes comparing Victoria's British accent to her real Ohio voice, and celebrated Judge Judy's methodical destruction of an elaborate fraud. British actors and accent coaches posted reaction videos analyzing just how terrible Victoria's fake accent had been, pointing out the inconsistent regional dialects, the incorrect vocabulary usage, and the moments where American pronunciations leaked through her performance. Linguists wrote articles about the psychology of people who adopt fake accents to create false credibility. Legal experts discussed the case as a perfect example of why background checks and verification matter in civil proceedings. The neighborhood where Victoria had been living experienced its own earthquake of revelations. Neighbors who had believed her aristocratic persona came forward with stories of how she'd manipulated them, borrowed money with promises of repayment from her supposed British bank accounts, and convinced several families to invest in fake opportunities. 2 neighbors admitted they'd given her a combined $8,000 for what she claimed were exclusive investment opportunities in London real estate developments that turned out to be completely fictional. Her landlord discovered that the lease application she'd submitted was filled with fabricated references and false employment history. Within 48 hours of the episode airing, she was evicted from her rental home and her belongings were placed in storage. The Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting to warn residents about the con artist who had infiltrated their community, using Judge Judy's episode as a cautionary tale about verifying people's identities and claims before trusting them with money or sensitive information. The criminal investigations moved quickly once Judge Judy's evidence package reached the appropriate authorities. The district attorney's office in Victoria's current jurisdiction filed fraud charges related to her lawsuit against Jennifer Lawrence and her other local scams. Authorities in Arizona, Florida, and Nevada were contacted about her outstanding warrants, and a coordinated effort began to track down all of her victims across multiple states. Within 3 weeks, Victoria Williams was arrested at a bus station attempting to flee to yet another state with yet another fake identity, this time claiming to be an Australian businesswoman with an accent she'd apparently learned from watching Crocodile Dundee. She was extradited to face charges in multiple jurisdictions, and prosecutors began building cases that would ensure she finally faced real consequences for her 15-year pattern of fraud and identity theft. Her public defender tried to argue that she had mental health issues that explained her behavior, but Judge Judy's systematic documentation of her calculated planning and deliberate deception made it clear this wasn't mental illness but rather conscious criminal behavior. 6 months after her humiliation on Judge Judy, Victoria Williams was convicted on multiple fraud charges across 3 different states. She received a combined sentence of 8 years in prison with requirements for restitution to all identified victims. The judge who sentenced her specifically cited Judge Judy's episode as evidence of her calculated nature and complete lack of remorse. Victoria's story became a landmark case studied in law schools as an example of how civil courts can uncover criminal patterns and how thorough investigation can expose elaborate frauds. It was used in fraud prevention training for community organizations, showing how con artists use fake personas and manufactured credibility to exploit trusting people. Jennifer Lawrence's courage in standing up to Victoria despite the intimidation and fake sophistication became an inspiring example for other victims of neighborhood bullies and scammers who use social status or perceived authority to avoid accountability. The episode remained one of Judge Judy's most watched and most shared cases in the show's entire history. It perfectly captured what made Judge Judy a cultural icon: her refusal to be impressed by performances, her thorough investigation of facts, her protection of innocent victims, and her absolute intolerance for people who waste her time with elaborate lies. Victoria Williams had thought her fake British accent would give her credibility, sophistication, and an advantage in court. Instead, it became the signature element of her most public humiliation, the theatrical flourish that made her exposure even more devastating and memorable. The moral was crystal clear and resonated with millions of viewers. Authenticity always defeats performance. Truth always overcomes lies. And in Judge Judy's courtroom, no accent, no costume, and no amount of theatrical sophistication can substitute for actual facts, genuine character, and honest behavior. Victoria Williams learned that lesson the hardest way possible, and her story became a permanent reminder that respect isn't earned through fake personas but through real integrity, and justice isn't impressed by accents but by evidence.